Welcome to the Charter Oak Chess Club's YouTube channel. Now today we're going to look at a chess game played by a magician. And I'm not talking about Harry Houdini or David Copperfield. I'm talking about the magician from Riga himself, the king of attacking chess, the 8th world champion, Mikhail Tal. Now if you've never seen a Mikhail Tal game before, you're in for a treat. He is by far one of the best attacking chess players. His games were filled with sacrifices, like he'd sacrifice a rook or maybe even his queen. And then because of that, he would get all these great attacking chances. So we'd get all these checks, all these tempo moves, and it would lead into either checkmate or just a completely winning position. So in this game, it's a little bit more tame. We're not going to see a queen sack or a rook sack, but it's still very good because he takes a seemingly drawn game, and then he still finds ways to activate his pieces and go on the attack. And that's why it was included in the most instructive games of chess ever played, a book by Erning Chernev. And so let's get into it. So Tal starts with pawn to e4. His opponent, G. Litzizin, plays pawn to c5. This is a Sicilian. If you've never seen this before, pretty simple. E4 takes the center. C5 is a very creative way to take the center from the side. So that's why it's a very popular opening. Knight to f3, d6, pawn to d4, so we're going into an open Sicilian, take, and now we can see why black played d6. The idea is to stop the pawn from pushing. So now black can play knight to f6, attacking the pawn, and knight to c3. Now, if you play the Sicilian a lot, you're going to get to this position many, many times, and we're all wondering what the next move's going to be here. Black has some choices. They might play a6. This is a Najdorf. The idea of a6 is to stop the bishops and knights from getting that b5 square. Also, black is going to push b5 later in the game, start getting an attack. We could just play a very simple move, knight to c6. Very, very classical, get your knights out into the center. Your pawn's attacking the center. Can't be a bad move at all. Maybe we'll go like this. We'll just, again, try to hit the center. There's a lot of fun things, that black can play here. But he goes for my favorite line in the Sicilian defense, which is pawn to g6, the dragon variation. And the idea is to use this fianchettoed bishop and this semi-open file on your c file. And you're just going to activate your pieces and really attack the queen side. And if white wants to attack this, what they should do is they should go into this, actually. They should play bishop to e3, move the pawn up, get the queen and bishop going after this g7 fianchettoed bishop, and castle queenside. And what you get is black attacking your castled king on the queen side, and then white's going to use all these pawns to attack the black king on the king side. And it's a very fun game. We're going to see how Tal handles this. He plays pawn to f4. This is the Levenfish variation. If you've watched the Queen's Gambit, they actually mentioned this variation quite a bit, which makes sense because it was more popular back then. Today, we would probably see pawn to f3, the Yugoslav attack. We're going to play like bishop first, bishop here, and then f3 to stop the knight from coming in. And then we'll get to a position like this, castle, and we can kind of see how, white's going to attack here and just start throwing pawns. And again, black is going to attack this castled king, and this bishop's going to be very, very powerful. By playing the Levenfish it's a very kind of similar idea, pushing f4. We're still going to attack on the king side a lot, especially when black castles. And we're probably still going to castle queenside if we want our best attacking chances. Because if I castle kingside, I really can't move these two pawns, right? So I really can't get them into the fight. It's a fine way to play, but if I really want to go for a win, we should castle opposite sides. So pawn to f4, grabbing space in the center, never move the f pawn, right? But look, the queen would have to get to h4 here to check us. I don't see how they're going to do that with their pawn and their knight over here. Also, we already know that we're castling queenside, so we don't mind moving pawn to g3 if we need to. So yeah, that's why we're able to kind of break the rule here. Knight to c6, and this is the first move that's kind of interesting that we should analyze a little bit, because if we just skip this move and we say, well, I would play bishop to g7 because I fianchettoed this bishop, right? I moved g6. I'm going to play bishop g7. And while bishop g7 might not be the worst move, it's a very tricky move, and we have to kind of look out for it. So if I play bishop to g7 right away, white has a lot of space in the center now. And so whenever you have a lot of space in the center, you want to push with your pawns and start attacking. You know, black is attacking the center from far away. They're taking a little bit too long. So we're going to push. We're going to hit that knight. And black will either have to retreat now, and this doesn't look very good, putting your knight back on g8. Knight to d7, kind of the same thing, not the best, we could probably take, and then suddenly this king is opened, and the pieces are moving backwards. If they try to keep their knight out in the middle of the board, you know, maybe put a counterattack on that pawn, white is simply going to find some great winning chances here. So one idea they could go for is bishop to b5, check. And there's not many good moves that black can play here, unfortunately. The best move would probably be knight to c6, which just loses a pawn after take, take, take. And anything else just loses on the spot. So bishop to d7, I really like this line. And the idea is to play queen takes. I've fallen for this trap before when I've played the Sicilian. The idea is the bishop can't take the queen because they're pinned. And if the bishop tries to take this way, that's totally fine because we have the pieces to take back. So just go back again. When they have this check, if the bishop goes, then it'll be pinned. It won't be defending this knight anymore. If the knight goes, it will be blocking. So again, we can just grab this piece, take it off the board. And then, so king to f8 seems like a pretty good move. Okay, I'm moving my king, but it's still pretty safe. I'll develop my pieces later. But now we have got the brilliant move, knight to e6. Yes, it's a fork. More importantly, it's a discovered attack. And so this queen is helpless because the king's in check. We have to get out of check either by taking or by moving. We can't move towards the queen, so we'll probably just take with bishop. And then boom, we have checkmate. If you take with pawn, we're still going to capture. We're going to win with queen. There's nothing wrong with that. And just completely winning. So going all the way back here, whenever you're going over a Grandmaster game and you're like, why did they move that? You know, why, you know, knight to c6 is good, but what else could they play, right? You want to look at every move. So I think the idea that bishop to g7 seems like a very obvious choice, and black played knight to c6. That's why the book decided, let's go over some of these lines. Let's see what happens here. So knight to c6 comes onto the board, and now that's just going to hit the center, and it's really going to stop a lot of white's ideas with e5 right away, all those traps. So Tal captures, black captures back. And now it's not as fun as before because we can see how that c-pawn is really stopping a lot of our attacks, right, with the knight and the bishop. So we're still going to push in the center, e5. We don't want to let black get a chance to play e5 themselves. The knight goes to d7 where it counterattacks e5. And now capture, capture. And by capturing this way, white's position looks a little weird with just this f4 pawn sitting by itself. It's very open by the king. But also, this bishop now has a new job. It kind of has to defend the d6 pawn for a little bit. And we know this bishop would love to go here. It'd love to go to g7, get on this long diagonal where it belongs. So white kind of has a fun time attacking this pawn and making black use their bishop. So, okay, so the next move, bishop to e3, just develop, right? In chess, you want to get your development out of the way. You want to castle. Bishop to e3 makes a lot of sense because we know we're going to castle queenside, right? If he didn't want to castle queenside for whatever reason, then it would make more sense for us to see, you know, something like bishop to d3, bishop to e2. But you've already broken your kingside, right? So why would we want to castle kingside here? Let's go queenside. So bishop to e3 makes the most sense. There's nothing to do with this king, by the way. It looks like there might be something to do. Like, why can't we attack right away? So if we play something like queen to d4, attacking the rook, keeping the pressure on this pawn, it just doesn't amount to anything. So we can move the knight to defend, and we have no way to really attack that knight. Our dark squared bishop really can't get in the game to attack this knight. So then we just develop, castle, castle. And guess what? This is totally fine. We can see how white really didn't win anything. Black starts to attack with c5. They have really good control over the light squares too. So now white's going to have to retreat. So again, there's really just no traps. And then whenever you see this king open, another thing that you're going to want to look for is how can I get check? So one way we can try to get check here is queen to e2. And normally these moves are very annoying. But again, black just has to be careful. They're thinking, I want a castle. Bishop to e7. I'm ready to castle now. And then we can both castle, like, probably going to castle queenside here. And again, it just doesn't really amount to anything. Sometimes in these positions, there's stuff we could do, like bishop goes here or something. But in this game, nothing's really going to happen, right? These pawns are doing a really good job keeping the knight out of the center, keeping the knight from attacking. So overall, you look for your attacking ideas, especially if you're someone like Mikhail Tal that always wants to go for these crazy sacrifices, and you say, well, there's nothing here. Bishop to e3. Let's play some chess. Let's develop our pieces. And after this, bishop to e7. Again, just kind of guarding that pawn. We have to guard that pawn until we castle. And then we can do other stuff. Queen to f3, because again, the queen has to develop. And I like this move because, some of us might think, I'm developing my queen, I'm going to play queen to d2. That's fine. But you don't want to play queen to d3. You don't want to play queen to e2. You don't want to block this bishop, right? So queen to f3. And then, maybe I'll have to look after knight over here and like this bishop attacking here, but I just got to watch out for that. I can defend against that. And now my queen's got a lot of spaces it can go to. And my bishop still has all these light squares it could go to. And we're ready to castle. So pawn to d5 makes a lot of sense, right? This bishop does not want to spend its whole time guarding this d6 square. So we push it to d5, castle queenside. And now, there we go. Get the bishop on the long diagonal. The queen's coming. The rook's coming. We're going to have a big attack on the queen side. If you're playing as white, you're just waiting to, get a few pawn moves in, g4, h4, stuff like that. Develop your light squared bishop, and then get back into the game. So what would white do here in this position? Well, they find a great move. Instead of developing their light squared bishop right away, they play bishop to d4. And this is a great move because we don't want to give black control of this giant diagonal all by itself. We want to fight for control over that. If we were to play something like bishop to d2, that would be fine. It would still defend this knight. But then maybe black pushes to d4, right? And the knight has to hop away. And we see, again, this bishop hitting, our castle, right? It only needs a few more pieces to come in and finish up the job. So I really like the fact that white is saying, hey, you're not going to get this diagonal for free. I'm going to fight for this. We can trade up some pieces, keep it interesting. You got a castle, right? You got a castle now, especially now because your king is open and this rook can check. And you don't want to move the bishop back because you finally got it onto this diagonal. So, of course, we're going to castle now. And now if you're playing as white, you're thinking, okay, I want to get attacking release quick, pawn to h4, right? This is the whole idea. Whenever you castle opposite sides, it's going to be an attacking game by nature. Because white is castled on the queen side, all these pawns can now attack the king. And for black, you're going to use these pawns to attack the king, right? And when pawns disappear, black's done a really good job of losing this b pawn, right? First it was a c pawn, then they recaptured. So look at this awesome semi-open file. If you get an open file in one of these games, it's a wrap. The game's over. So if you get anywhere where there's no pawns, normally that side's going to win. So h4, we're going to play h5. We're going to try to trade. And then, boom, we're going to have our open file, and we're going to win the game. That's kind of the game plan. Let's see what happens. Black plays rook to b8. That makes the most sense. But we should think, why are we not taking this pawn, right? Because we have two attackers. So we could take the pawn. If you were white, how would you continue to finish this game? Well, we know that we have the semi-open file now. And I can see that my bishop and my rook are attacking this way. So I want to continue attacking there. And the best move, queen to h3. because now we have 2 attackers and only have 1 defender, so we're going to win a bishop. And if you move away, then I'm going to get checkmate on h7. So this is a pin, because this is the more valuable square behind, and this is the piece that's in front. So black could play pawn to g5, and try to hold on to the bishop for one more move. Now we play g3 because I want to keep my queen and rook where they are, threatening that checkmate. And now a very creative move, knight to f6. It's not about the knight. It's about this discovery with this bishop attacking the queen. Again, I want to keep my queen and rook where it is. So one thing that we could try, pawn to f5, interrupts the bishop attacking, and now there's nothing to do. This bishop is completely trapped. If you take with the bishop, we can just take with the knight. We take the knight with the bishop and then threaten checkmate. If they take with this bishop, we could take here. We'll just show what that looks like. Capture, capture. We're already up material. 2 attackers on this knight. Only 1 defender. Pawn's attacking the bishop. Again, if the bishop moves, we can just take here, and now we're threatening checkmate again. So this game would be completely over. So luckily, Tal's opponent was a grandmaster himself. So he goes, I'm not going to take that pawn. I'm going to completely ignore it. I'm going to play a rook to b8. They're not even worried about defending their own pawn, because if White wants to take this, everything's open, right? Everything's open. It's going to be a very easy attack. So we keep going. Queen to f2, and queen to f2 is a really fun move, actually, because there's a lot going on here. If we play quickly, we would say, hey, bishop attacking bishop, it's defended. Let me move my light square bishop. Let me push this pawn up the board. Let me focus on my attack, not really worry about what my opponent's doing. But we have to take the time here because there's a lot going on. So if we were to play something like g3, just kind of any old move, and not play queen to f2, there's a very sneaky tactic, which is bishop takes d4, and we say, well, that's fine. I'm going to take with my rook. But now the rook is hanging, and black gets queen to b6, and they get a very nice fork. And if you try to save your rook, yes, black's only getting a pawn back, but it's a really good pawn, right? We're getting that check. The king has to run out, from its cover, and the king is completely exposed. Again, talking about when we get that open file, this game is pretty much done. All the attacks are going to start coming in. White's just going to be dancing around the board at this point, and they're going to start losing a lot of material or just instantly get checkmated. So, for all his attacking, fame, Mikhail Tal was also really good at playing defense. And I think when you really study your tactics, you're not only learning how to win games, you're learning how to just play well and defend. You're trying to see everything on the board. So queen f2, now after take, if the queen tries to come to b6, we'll just trade off. That's totally fine. So, all right, let's keep going here. So the rook comes down. And then we have 2 attackers. Okay, we got 2 defenders. We're doing pretty good here. Let's just trade some material off, right? Take the bishop, take the bishop. I really like this for white. When you trade this off, I think this bishop was a lot better for black. And for white, we weren't really doing much besides counterattacking. So just trading off this piece makes a lot of sense. Maybe the knight's a little bit weaker because it doesn't have a pawn to defend it. But again, just for fun, let's see, why aren't we taking this free pawn, right? Now, positionally, we could just say, like the strategy of it all, we could say, you know what? You're really just helping them open the file. Like maybe that other rook gets over here. You're helping them just open the attack on your king. And that could be enough. But tactically, we could actually go in and start seeing, what we could actually do right away. Queen a5, attacking the bishop, putting pressure on the castle. White has to defend. And now a great move, rook takes b2. I really like this move. The idea is this knight is now just hanging. And if we try to capture the rook, and we say, well, at least we got a rook, you don't take with the queen, you take with the bishop. Because the bishop is going to guard all the flight squares. the place where his king can escape. King can go anywhere, it doesn't matter. If they go over here, check, checkmate. If they decide I'm just going to go straight back down, check, checkmate. And then if they try to go up, that is just immediately going to be checkmate. So it's all about tempo here. We got to be really careful. We can't just, go taking pawns. And so because of this, Tal goes, I'm not going to do any of that. Bishop takes, capture, capture. And now if you're white, try to think about what would you play in this position. So first of all, we don't take this pawn on a7. If we were to do that, something like queen to d6, maybe threatening this pawn. And now, again, a rook sack. Even without the bishop, they can still go for these crazy, crazy lines. So giving up a full rook, king takes, check, taking the knight, and now we're just completely dead here as white. Our castle is broken. There's a lot of tactics that can come on the board. White just decides to go attack, check, knight checks. The queen is cutting off these squares. The knight is hitting check. The king has to move. Check. There's only one spot for his king to go. The knight's attacking here. We try to block. The queen's just going to take. The knight's attacking here, so the king has to go up the board. And now with all these spaces taken up by the queen and the knight, where's the checkmate move? There's a checkmate in one move here. Try to find it for black. And it's bishop to g4. So getting every single piece into the mix here. That's just one line that it could go through. But just knowing that this rook sack is completely sound for black and that this will lead to an end. Whether we have to bring in the rook, doesn't matter how many pieces we're going to bring in, we are going to get checkmate. So that was a lot of information all based on, can we take this pawn? We know now for both sides, you don't take the pawn, over here, or you don't take the pawn over here, because you're just opening files for your opponent's pieces, the rooks and the queens. So instead, what would you do here as white? Well, you got this rook that's, seems like it's going to come into the attack. Seem like there could be some sacrifices, some checkmates. So the best thing to do, pawn to a3. Let's hit that rook. Now the knight doesn't have to worry about defending that pawn either. And we're going to force that rook back, and then we're going to continue with our attack, right? I'm going to play h5. I'm going to play, all these pawns forward. I have to develop this last bishop, by the way. Tal's kind of taking, their sweet time on that. And as black, you also have to develop this light square bishop. You just got to get it out of the way so that your rooks can easily slide into action. We call these connected rooks once we get that bishop out of the way. So queen to b6, I really like this. Instead of just sliding the rook back, it's saying, hey, I'm just going to put a quick little counterattack, and if you capture, which Tal does, take, everything's still safe. Knight goes to a4. It's a very fun move. Normally, I hate these moves, knight to a4, because the rook just comes over here and kicks the knight. It's kind of a wasted move, but in this case, the knight is controlling these two squares, and the bishop, even though it hasn't moved this game, is controlling these squares. The pawns are controlling these squares, so the rook can't counterattack. So it just has to run away. And now this knight is stopping c5 from pushing. So black wants to kind of push their pawns to attack this king later, but how are they going to push this pawn? Also, they can only push the a pawn as far as a5. So I really like this. Knight's got an outpost if it wants to use it. And let's develop that last piece. So let's get the bishop out of the way. Now the knight goes here, kind of doing the same thing we talked about. Attacking this pawn. Got an outpost. The bishop is guarding here, so we can't just throw our pawns at the knight. So a very good move. You got to play a little bit of defense for both sides. You can't just always be attacking. So both these moves find really good ways to get their pieces activated and start helping to protect their king. White plays rook to f1. Black develops their rook onto the open file in the center. They're still going to attack, a little bit on either side. But once those queens got traded off, it's become a bit more of a draw here. We can't go for these crazy attacking lines with just, 2 or 3 pieces. We're not going to have enough to get checkmate. We can't sacrifice our rook now. We don't have that queen to come in to deliver checkmate. So far, it's pretty even. Both sides tried to play some fun attacking lines, but it looks like we're just going to go to a draw here. Pawn to f5. So this is the first way to make it a little bit fun. After capture, white is actually not going to recapture this pawn, which is weird. There's 2 attackers, 1 defender. But Tal is saying just having these 2 pawns stacked up, these double pawns, double isolated pawns, because on either side of these pawns, they don't have another pawn that can make a pawn chain. So we call these double isolated pawns. This pawn's an isolated pawn. This pawn over here is an isolated pawn. So with that one move, we've really broken the structure a little bit, so it's worth giving up a pawn for. Still a very even game, but it's a fun move to play. Now to rook comes e1. Notice how black doesn't take this rook. If you take this rook, white now controls the open file. And black got there first, so they're saying, no way. I'm going to move my rook over here. And now after capture, black still controls the open file. So that's it's a small move, but it's a very important move to kind of look at things like this and say, why didn't they just, play the obvious takes? So here, Tal decides, this game's looking like a draw. I sacked 1 pawn, it's still looking like a draw. But I'm going to go all out for a win. Try to see what you would play as white here if you wanted to go all out and try to win this game. So the title of this game in the book is called The King is a Strong Piece. And so Tal is going, hey, we each have a rook, we each have a bishop, we each have a knight, but I'm going to start playing with my king. And so he moves king to d2, and there's nothing crazy about this move. Maybe it's defending the rook and stuff. Nothing crazy about king to d2. The knight goes over here, hits the outpost, stops the pawn from defending this other pawn. And now the king continues to go up. King to c3. King to d4. Rook to d2. So we can just see how crazy this is becoming. The king is in the center of the board, but there's no checkmate. There's no checkmate yet. Also notice how you probably wouldn't want to play like bishop takes, because this bishop is doing a good job controlling these 2 squares so that the rook can't come in and get us in some kind of skewer. So just moving everything up the board very nicely. Now that knight finally goes to that outpost, attacks the rook. Rook has to move away. Black is going to pick up another pawn here. But it doesn't matter because this king is so active. It's going to start going after all these undefended pawns. And look at black's king. It's like they're not even in the game. So, all right, let's keep going here. Capture. Black is up 2 pawns now. But now we see the king sneaking in. It's going to get to c6. Check. The king is on c7. The king has made it all the way from this side of the board and has marched all the way to c7. And it was never checkmated. It got a few checks, that's fine, but it was never checkmated, and now this king is a menace. It can start attacking all these weak pawns. If the king gets behind these pawns, this rook has to play defense, right? This rook doesn't have to play defense. This rook can now go after the pawns if it wants. It can do whatever it wants now. So the king is super active here. Knight to f5. King still moves. Goes to a7. Gonna win the pawn. Knight goes to d4. Again, very nice outpost. White's got their own isolated pawn here. Black is doing everything in their power to just move this pawn up the board, right? They would love to get a pass pawn here. Even if white takes, we got another pass pawn. So It is still going to be a race here. Rook to f2. Pawn moves up. Now the knight's guarding this pawn, which means this rook can finally move again. Capture. Knight goes over here. Do we capture the knight? No. We go for check. King to f8. King takes pawn. This is wild. The king is taking the pawn here, and you would think that there's something here. Some kind of discovered attack. Like, I'm going to move this knight, I'm going to move it somewhere, and the rook is attacking the king. But there's nowhere really good to go. Like, you go here, you get a double check even. But it doesn't really do anything. The king just moves away again. If we go for double check, let's just take this pawn. So even though it's lined up, this king is fearless. So knight takes. This is still check. Take. Let's do a count here. Black has 4 isolated pawns, but it's 4 pawns against 4 pawns. But the king is threatening to take, and this king is doing absolutely nothing. So rook goes over, and white takes. And the idea of moving this rook is really just a passive move, because now this rook wants to go over here. It couldn't do that and move earlier because the king is guarding this square. Pawn move, take, take. Now it's 3 pawns against 2 because, again, Tal's king was so active, was able to be this giant attacking piece at the end of the game. King goes over to e7. King goes to c5. Rook goes over. And I love this move, rook to d4. In the first game in this book, we looked at Capablanca, who had his rook on e7 on the 7th rank, and it stopped the king from moving. And that's how he was able to get his king active. And in fact, there was even an example of this earlier in the game, something that could have been played. So like if we go to here, when the king starts marching up, if white decides to play something like b3, and bishop takes, king takes, this rook could have come in with check, and now the rook is on that 7th rank, and again, we can see how the rook is going to start just being an absolute menace here. So if we go back now, oh, not that. Let's keep going here. So if we go back to this move, again, that idea of the rook cutting off the king from action. I always love these moves in endgames because it really stops an entire piece from moving. If we think about the attacking pieces in this game, it's king and rook. Pawns really don't count. So just king and rook. This king has a job. It's going to move the pawn up. This king has no job right now. It's a completely useless piece. Check. King over, supporting the path of the pawn. King over. And look, this rook cannot take this pawn. Can't go here because the king's there. It can move up, trying to stop the pawn. But now another great move. Check. King's got the opposition. The rook is forcing the king back again. How's this king ever going to stop this pawn? Never going to happen. Now the king goes over here. We can't get this check again with the rook because the king is just in the way. We'd rather not have this king in this game. Rook tries to go, hey, I can at least pick up this g-pawn. I have my own pass pawn, and then I can stop this pawn from the back with, rook to b2. At least it's something. Pawn, pawn. Take. King goes over. The idea here, now the king's more active. The king can take this pawn, and this is a pass pawn. Pass pawn is any pawn that doesn't have another pawn to stop them. So all 3 of white's pawns actually are pass pawns. Because if they go up the board, there's no pawn that can stop them. Look at this pawn here. There's no black pawns to the left or right that can stop this pawn from becoming a queen. And definitely no pawns over here. So just moving up the board. When the rook gets behind the pawn, it's a wrap. This is going to become a queen. Pawn over here. Pawn over here. We have a little bit of a race. But once we get the pawn to b7, it is game over. It's absolutely game over. White is just a little bit too quick. And if we want to see what could have happened, rook goes to c2 check, king moves aside, and we're both going to get a queen at the same time. But it's white to move. And try to think how you would finish this game here. When you have the first move, you want to really try to go for checkmate really quick. So what could white play here? Well, I want to go for that ladder method. And the best way to start is with a check. Queen to g3. There's so many ways to go wrong here. If the king tries to escape this way, we get queen in front of the king. Classic checkmate. If the king takes, we get our ladder mate. Queen and rook. And so if the king tries to run, actually if it goes here, that looks like, oh, it's kind of, queen's defending this square, so we can't move rook or queen here. We just got to get a little creative. Queen to g6. That is checkmate. Now, if the king really tries to run, we could just play rook to f4. This is already enough. It's a fork. Capture, capture. We know who's going to win this game. But again, think about, well, the king is doing a good job guarding. I got my pawn here. Let me go for this. Look at all the squares we take up. It's not quite checkmate, but we're forcing the king to only one square. Let's bring in the rook. And again, we're going to get checkmate somehow here. If they go here, maybe I'll play check. Queen has to come checkmate. That works. We could also go over here and get checkmate. We go d6. King goes here. Checkmate. And if the king moves over here, no checkmate over here because we got the queen involved. But again, it's not going to take very long for us to find a checkmate. Here's a check. King has to go to the side. Now we have checkmate. So it was a very, very even game, actually, if we go all the way back to the beginning here. They tried for attacking chess with the Sicilian. Everything was going pretty well. Both players kind of got what they wanted. And then once we saw those queens come off the board, here, very drawn, very drawn. Even here, still very drawn. Sack the pawn. Yeah, black's position is a little bit worse, but it's really nothing. But what changed this game is white got a little too many moves here. Even here, maybe black can start bringing their king up. But once this king got to d4, it was a wrap. There's no way to checkmate this knight. There's no way. There's a lot of checks, but none of them work, right? We could check here. We're just going to take. Or maybe even take this pawn. So once the king's on d4, white has a whole extra piece in this game. And we just see how Tal knew to immediately go for this type of game. Even though, again, just like in the Capablanca game, they're down 2 pawns. But the king is so active, it doesn't matter. Because now it's like saying, okay, I'm down 2 pawns, but I have an extra piece. I have an extra, let's call it 3-point piece. Just like a knight or bishop. I have an extra 3-point piece that's going to take a lot of pawns. So it doesn't even matter that I'm down 2 pawns. It's a really great game. It really shows how to use, endgame techniques. It's really important to think, I just played this crazy Sicilian defense with all these tactics. But at the end of the day, the only thing that really mattered was the last couple moves. Everything was even. And just when we're ready to give up and say, okay, let's just call it a draw. Let's just trade off all the rest of these pieces. We still got to think tactically. We still got to think about how can I develop all my pieces. It's like we have a second opening. First we put the king tucked away in the corner, and then we start to think, well, if I'm not getting checkmated, then I want to go back to developing, right? How can I make my rooks more active? They haven't been doing anything all game. How can I get my king out into the center of the board? Do I have a piece that was good, but now it needs to find a new square, right? You don't want to keep your knights on just c3, f3, c6, f6 all game, right? You want to be jumping around with those knights. I think both players did a great job finding awesome outposts that they can, maximize the use of their knight. But at the end of the game, Tal decided to play with an extra piece, and his opponent didn't.